Jill here with Sirius Talis Moon, and this is the third episode of Love is Not Profane. And I'm recording this episode while painting or attempting to paint a flower. And why a flower? Flowers are associated with Venus. Yes, this is true. Flowers, however, are also associated with the female reproductive system and also the male reproductive system. Now, in cultures and societies where flowers represent sex trafficking or selling flowers represents sex trafficking, we basically see the same things I was talking about in the previous episode that is currently processing. Um, and I'm going to use my green and blue. So I'm basically painting on actually a historical item, which is the previous mixer that my mom received for her wedding, basically about 14 years or 12 years before I was born. I'm 41. The mixer died about a year or two ago, and this also tells us something about the changes in industrial society. Um, and so kind of creating a little bit of different hues of that blue and green. Some more to the greenish, some more to the bluish. And I'm going to try and begin with the dark, as they say. The art of using flowers to correct wrongs. I think in Northern Slavic houses, um, women used flower paintings to correct the cracks in the walls of the house. And they created a beautiful, beautiful art. There is a Japanese artist, I forgot her name, and my internet is kind of like halfway, um, that is known for painting just flowers. And she is actually hospitalized. Um, Now everybody knows what I think about it, right? Now I'm trying to paint another version of flower. I don't know how it would work. And I'm using the dark second. And so, in societies where the flower, meaning the virginity of or the sex of the women, is a tradable item, we have growing or exponentially growing issues with birthing. Whether it's people wanting to be child free, which in more traditional societies means widows, which entails murder. And so this would create the fear of man that the woman would want to inherit them financially, or is them for the inheritance. And I'm like, don't rape women. Make sure the society is allowing a woman to say no, to have, whether within or outside of marriage. That will solve a lot of financial worries about women being gold diggers or honeypots. um, okay, definitely the first flower came out better than the second. But this is also an example how the feminine and the nature become a symbol of commodification. It also challenges me to think about the commodification of nature. For women that recover from sexual boundary violation, land and growing a garden, whether it's by rewilding or whichever technique, is actually very important and even crucial. And so this regulates the nervous system, and the connection to the land is also the connection of reconnecting with the reproductive system in a way that is. And I'm not even talking about ecosexuality, which is another fascinating, fascinating thing. um, but wherever the connection to the land was severed, um, we see the commodification of nature, where the oil underneath the resource of World Center for Recovery for Skin Diseases, which are people dealing with environment that doesn't allow them to be who they are, essentially. Combat planes, battling with screensaver, and yet coming up with something that some things. Now I have here basically a ball of orange paint that got hardened, and it still colors. It's an oil paint, but in a solid form. Um, and I'm having a little bit more play with this. Now, here, think about how things like fun, play, things of the fifth house become commodified to the loss of sense of self, which is also where the children play. It was only around COVID where we had a research from Finland because they had to justify keeping the children outside. But the research was true that even in the cold countries, having children play outside is good for the immune system, and having them encountering with the natural pathogens of nature. Um, Around COVID, I was surrounded with people that had immune system failures, and a shit ton of sandalwood is needed because sandalwood, Australian sandalwood, is a tree that is growing from the nourishment of its surroundings. Um, and this is very good for the skin, particularly for people who deal with the environment not really allowing them to be who they are. This is why also women have more immune system issues, or what they call autoimmune. because in societies where being a woman is being profane or devoid of sense of self, that can explain that it does manifest physically. Now, these societies are very esoteric. They do understand spirit and matter. Okay, my little orange flower. It looks like a flower that's actually in its own plant. Um, but just think about how play, fun, and things that denote nature, like flowers or fruits, became a trigger. And which was the point, that people would be triggered by nature, that people will fear nature, which, by the way, also creates problems with science, because the scientist that said, or the philosophy of science that said, court nature and she will reveal her secrets to you. By the way, even in modern times, where, particularly during Uranus in Taurus, but also in Aries, when people began to re-look or re-examine relational teachings, one of the people, I think it was Matthew, I don't remember. He had the get the girl and get the guy, um, and he was talking about the handkerchief, and those are basically things that were taken from courtesans, because the courtesans had the arts of flirting, and so we learned we learned the art of flirting from courtesans, but courtesans were trained to never actually let go and be fully with the man. They were trained to be unattainable so that the man will become addicted to their services, and the relationship became transactional. Really think about it, if they had to make money from basically a man wanting to be with them, and they had to market them, so they had to be unique and they had to make the man fall in love so that he will keep coming back, but they couldn't completely be with him. There had to be an erotic challenge that, for the people that did not practice cervical orgasm, would maintain those in their erotic intelligence teachings. I may have triggered international gurus right now. Now, for those that did practice cervical orgasm, and it's, again, it's not a goal to reach, it's not a peak to reach. The other way around, it's a Neptunian art of eroticism that is with oneself or with partner, and usually it takes a couple of days to process, or even more. It's very spiritual, but basically it's a body, mind, heart, and soul experience that can make the nervous system very excited and very perceptive. Um, and so the natural ebb and flow of sexuality that people try to control and make enrich the unattainable is ebbing and flowing naturally when we align with the eroticism, open hearted, shame, feel free of shame, but not free of shame about, I'm sorry, um, being with children or with animals, but free of shame in the sense of self supporting of eroticism that allow us to dissolve and regain our sense of self in a natural ebb and flow. Doesn't go with anything. Entire earth has to adapt. Doesn't go with Nazi occult. Doesn't go with tyranny. Doesn't go with energy siphoning. It's both a physical and energy orgasm. And it's not a to-do list. By the way, right before the Me Too were the first times that I experienced actual cervical orgasms. Something was coming to the surface, and indeed, I would be one of the people that would speak in the Me Too. And I wrote a satire about literally the intelligence, like literally the Epstein cult. The part of the Epstein cult that infiltrated the intelligence and the academia and the military and so on and so forth. The sovereign soldiers, all these things that I was speaking about right now. And mind you, it was it was an academia in Israel. People were hearing about martial arts and the feminine, embodying the feminine as a political leader rather than relying on having to masquerade or not be genderless, um, but at least have a play on the more masculine expression to so-called be taken seriously. Um, the political arena has changed since 2017 a lot. Even in NATO, there was a strong emphasis on inclusion of women, and when we take into account the forced gender modifications or forced sex modifications, then it's even more. Like there's even more that we don't know. Um, so yeah, that was, and then we had the case with the dean, and I was the only one talking about this because it's like it was on the news. Nobody had any conversation with the students unless they came to my class, and and people were grateful because nobody talked to them about that. Um, it's like only now I'm thinking back as I'm giving this teaching. Um, and so the attempts to siphon or take or fragment the energy is creating a lot of teachings that don't make sense about relations, about communication, about erotic intelligence that I somehow intuitively knew that something's missing. Yeah, and when it would hit a spot, it was the like, um, and so this is also where we cannot dedicate that energy to something that's not supportive of love that is actually loving. And by the way, because I had gone through horrible attempts it's not basically I'd gone through. Um, Somebody was trying to bring that energy or rape and then rape that energy, particularly about somebody was trying to curate some billionaires' um, birthing trauma or upbringing trauma or relation with the mom trauma, and they were doing that in the astral, and because it was involving some sort of a whistleblower, I guess I was more naive, and then um, it was actually not coming from the erotic, but from more like the caregiving, or I really don't remember because it was about they were really trying to encourage birthing and a gnosis about birthing, and it was really sad because that energy was not supposed to have been siphoned and broken down. Um, but eventually, one of the women of that billionaire um, litigated for a huge amount of a sum of money for the children. And he has quite some women. I was not never present in the room with that person. It was all astral, um, and I also saw the product that came up using that energy. And funnily enough, I identified the product like a mother identified a child. Um, it was a product that I supported, but the fact that the energy was fragmented is something that I don't blame that billionaire, but actually the people that were facilitating what was supposed to be actually healing experience. And so very likely he was duped himself. Um, and I was just not really knowing what is real, what is not in the astral, until of course I go through across a certain car and I'm like, well, that's my baby. And this is, um, yeah, it is something that I had to process with myself. And um, whereas like they didn't, whereas in they had to put violence where they shouldn't have put violence to begin with. Because like everything was okay. I was not sleeping with that person. I was not, you know, um, and and by the way, we have karmic rope with the moon, which is, and this is where basically both Kulu's ideas and houses, um, and you kind of see the thread of what the energy does. And I was like really sad that they used the violent method to take something that was already like supporting the idea or holding space, a creative space for the idea, was something that was already there. It's just that there was incompatibility with the karmic rope of the moon, and something was taken by force, creating both a trauma to me that was horrific. It was basically rape, astral rape, and to that person that came to heal something about his upbringing. Um, and those things are all happening spontaneously as I'm going about my chores in the house, or so it was not something that I subscribed to or became a part of or even consented to, but because it seemed something that was benevolent at first, I was like, okay, like it doesn't seem harmful. Um, Now, more things that I can say about all of this connection with to art or to nature, to flowers, um, and to the feminine is that those are not the profane. And even knowing that, um, even consciously holding space for that, even challenging our own notions, because around the Me Too, I can say that I was really, really cautious. And I was saying, well, we need to remove the C factor of trafficking from anything sex work related industry. And and then I was met with the question, so what? Are people not to have sex because there is rape in the world? And to be quite honest, if I think about my life since the Me Too, at the most, like if I think about like my sex life since the Me Too, a lot of it was trying something and seeing that I ran into something that tried to scam or siphon me. I was surprised at what echelons, but it doesn't, and this was actually making it, I'm not saying more tragic, but definitely um, a lot. I think I was literally seeing how what is quite wealthy people are being duped and tricked and siphoned and extorted exactly where they come to heal, which was also my trauma when I came to heal. Um, I have Chiron in conjuncting Pluto and Neptune. I might not be the only one. Okay, the people around my year, 1984, may have experienced that we have to sift the wheat from the chaff when it comes to healing our Chiron. And Chiron in Aries was particularly good for that because Chiron in Aries, and I remember Rachel Spring, where she said, Chiron in Aries, people are going to find out that they are the healer. They can't rely on anything external to guide them thoroughly. They have to sort the wheat from the chaff. They have to sovereign up when it comes to their healing. And this was such a great preparation because Chiron will ingress to Taurus this year, maybe even this month. I don't remember. This month or next month, or in April maybe. Um, but this was such a good preparation for Neptune in Aries, where, I have an essay titled, there it is, The Myth of Spiritual Hygiene, which is also psychiatry, and it's used by colonial empires as a tool in building and preserving national identity. And I took a look at the British case. Now, to say that Israel is not copy pasting this essay would be a complete lie. Okay? Um, and this is where people got. My interest was from the perspective of philosophy of science, because we had the myth of science before we had the science. With the science, where we actually take a look at the science of what is the schizophrenia, because people always go to the extremes. And if we think about schizophrenia, what is schizophrenia? It's the fragmented information of the intelligence that trains its people by rape and torture. Um, and so instead of assassinating them later, they would just drug them up to various degrees of drugging them up and do all kinds of experiments, and usually with drugs that are chemical castration. And that was before COVID. That was before COVID. In fact, one of the greatest pieces of information that I got was from a person that was diagnosed as schizophrenic. Um, and even the nurses already knew that he's just frequency sensitive. And I asked him if I think it was Seroquel or whatnot, that he was receiving was helping him to ground. And he said a little bit, but then I go up again. And then he was talking about the doctor that was doing experiments in him and about the plan to do some androgen race. Because he was like, people want to do like the androgen and not female, not male, and it's very bad for humanity. And I was like naively asking, okay, like, what's bad about androgen? Because I was thinking play with gender. But that was not what he was referring to. Androgen is all very fun, but it's not forced. So, um, and this is where people, actually, Immanuel Kant was known for having a sexual philosophy that ideated sexlessness or the approximation of sexlessness. People are like, no, he talked about sex only with love, only with marriage, like a good Christian. Falcon, read Immanuel Kant. The one liner, everybody can give you the one liner. This was the story of a person who was tortured in the church, and he was, I think it was the beginning of Protestant, or divergence or denomination of Protestant, and he was trying to be a good person, albeit the sexual torture, and which he could only refer to as the sexual in as much as he knew it. Um, Gotta pop some more color, more vibrant color. And a way to make oil vibrant is simply to add more oil. It's kind of like pick a vibrant color and just add more oil. It's like what's vibrant? Abundance. Um, yeah. Then I pressed the orange and it became it became dull. Um, Now there are people that are. I need to buy the thing that they cover this with, but I don't have it. I need to learn more about processing oil. Anyway, actually, what's happened? What was good about COVID is that eventually, I moved from attempts with acrylic when I was in Netherlands to actual oil and buying the first oil, painting with oil. It was an act of self-honoring. And I'm a great believer that people can do great stuff even with the tools that they have. But I'm also a great believer in honoring ourselves and investing in that oil or investing in that good quality product um, when we can. It does. And I really love about the oil that we wait, the waiting for it to, the process of creation. Um, Now, how to take all that I'm saying and bringing it to action. The first thing that I think about is giving things the time and space, whether it's by painting, by creating, um, by practicing the art, by each individual having their own gnosis. People are going to say that's what Sophia did, encouraging people to do it for themselves. Yeah, yeah, I think I have second house Aries and the ruler is in the ninth house, so um, not gonna teach you to assassinate by yourself. but, but if I think about prevention of assassination, and I can definitely frame that in this way, um, and it's not considered framing because those practices do prevent assassination. um, Actually, particularly when I was doing the denim algae painting that I have here, and I was channeling, and from the lineage where I tended to political assassination that happened, I received something about the way women were called whores, and that was completely that was somebody that has, I think, a moon in my 12th house or placement in my 12th house. And that was completely a blind spot to me. Like there was something that I was completely unaware of, um, because of the isolation and dissociation that explained a lot. It was kind of like, oh, okay, that's the grand missing. And then I began to talk about, I think, the courtesan cartisan division and so on. And this lineage is related to when I was in Netherlands and I was channeling, but also when I was painting. One of the very first paintings with acrylic was when I was dipping my hands, my fingers into the acrylic, and then the simple page. It was not even canvas um, that I had. I began to type, and the colors they had, the red and the dark colors, kind of like the colors that I have right now when I think about it. And it was like tapping that was like printing, and um, they basically the acrylic on my fingertips was also creating the actual identification of me, and yet it was a channeled painting. Later, I learned all kinds of techniques by channeling. The neighborhood was the pipe. It was next to the church, next to the Oranienkerk, um, and the place is called a makom or makom. And the area around was where all the streets were. That a lot of the streets in that area are after painters. Um, yeah, and then I was just it was a deep and profound emotional experience for me. It was something that I remember as the very good thing about all the horrible things that happened around that time. Not not the context of what the content of the painting refers to, but the going and painting and channeling and creating. Um, I'm a creative person myself, but this was there is my own creativity, and then there was the channeling, which was another form of creation. Um, because the minute I began to channel, I was tortured at hospital, like I said. Then there are many things where I don't quite know to sort the wheat from the chaff. But I did not like I stood in my power, which basically exposed the shit ton of dumbfuckery in itself. Um, but that was the remembering that each and every sovereign has their own life energy and creative energy, and at the same time we are able to channel creative energy, and no, we don't need torture to share a dream, to share creation, um, which is something that both indigenous people and elites that inspire, they were inspired by appropriating indigenous people. Um, and in that, I'm different to the people that cut slack to many. They either cut slack to the bourgeoisie because of appeasement and even survival, or they cut slack to the indigenous, by the way, from the same perspective of the mythization and erotization of the exotic and the profane as the conquered people. Because I hold neither cup of the scales, I see through to both illusions from my perspective. Um, so this is my Love is Not Profane third episode series. And this is where we also are called to discern between reclaiming, like painting a flower, and the flower is not sex trafficking, is not the looted but mythicized nature. And this is actual reclaiming, whereas the um, industrialized, organized reclaiming, where you see the fist. I actually really thank Freya for showing me that when I was probably used, it was to release a person from a really harsh prison. Um, and I know how they can make the image that something is not as bad as it seems. Everything about those things are worse than it's worse than it seems. Um, but I was shown how I don't see everything, and I was really told to not use the clenched fist, to open the fist, and that was a very good teaching. It was very important, and it came right on time. Um, to me, through Freya, when I say Freya, I don't mean Freya the goddess directly, but actually Freya from Two Houses North. Um, yeah, it gets a lot of people uncomfortable that I talk about both that and that, but I speak the truth. um, I have Uranus in my 10th house in the sign of Jupiter, so it is transforming and liberating and um, not not accepting everything as is, but actually um, allowing things to be revolutionized naturally within me and not holding myself back when that happens. Um, I think I think nearly every guru or teacher or channeler or shaman that came across my path so that um, and so yeah, it would just it's the natural evolution, I guess, um, of revolution. So if I move forward into the notion of the feminine, the nature, the flower, um, no longer being in captivity or under control, not spiritually, not energetically, not financially, not physically, not emotionally. This is sovereignty. And this also is an antidote to emasculation. There's a difference between a man allowing himself to be a man, which also means being emotional, which also means holding space for himself. So he's not completely dependent on an external figure to do that. And a man being emasculated and then displaying acts that would be considered by his fellow men hysterical, where basically the hysterium or the womb was, or the state of hysterium was achieved by emasculation. And mind you, those are achievement in the sectors that I'm talking about. Because it collapses the frequency and it generates perpetual war and control and chaos and unleashment. And it's always done under the guise of enlightenment. Um, Not my pregnant cat reaching behind me where when I'm broadcasting. Um, Speaking about the open question of castration of pets, I had experience with castrated pets because we lost a dog to a car accident when we didn't castrate her. Um, and it was also the what to do with the puppies. It was not we're not trying to breed um, or have a breeding business or something like that. Um, and I can say that all the animals that were castrated um, basically had cancer. So it's kind of like they lived a longer life than they would in the modern city. Um, but then they had cancer. And by the way, when we talk about humans, the chemical castration, namely psychiatric drugs, is doing the same. Johnson and Johnson. Um, um, and in general, to mess with the hormonal system runs the risk of cancer, amongst many other not nice things. So when we talk about basically cancer is overgrowth of cells, moon-related disease, and Jupiter-related disease. Now that Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer. Feynman died of cancer, and around the time where I was watching a lot of his content, I also received the many teachings about the fact that we actually have cures for cancer, but also the holistic perspectives around cancer. I do have cancer in the lineage. Um, and of course, sexual boundary violation is a major factor that contributes to anomalies in cell growth because it's a core interference that also permeates the cellular level. Um, if you think about the extent of the violence that humanity went through to be basically controlled and commodified, even in hidden Neptunian or secretive ways. So thanks for watching this episode 3 of Love is Not Profane.